The year is 64 AD. Rome burns while Nero fiddles. In the opulent halls of the imperial palace, a young slave limps through marble corridors, carrying scrolls for his master. His name is Epictetus, literally meaning the acquired one, a possession, a piece of property. But this broken slave, walking with a twisted leg, carries within him something his captors could never touch, something that would outlive emperors, outlast empires, and teach the world the most profound truth ever spoken. That true freedom doesn't come from breaking chains on your wrists, but from breaking chains on your mind. This is the story of how a crippled slave became Rome's greatest teacher of freedom. A man who lost everything the world considers valuable, yet discovered something priceless. His words would echo through gladiator arenas, inspire prisoners of war, and guide the most powerful emperor in history. But first, he had to endure hell. To understand Epictetus, you must first understand the Rome he inhabited, a city drunk on power, ruled by madness, and built on the backs of the enslaved. Born around 50 to 55 AD in Hierapolis in modern-day Turkey, Epictetus was brought to Rome as a young boy and became the property of Epaphroditus, a wealthy freedman who served as secretary to Emperor Nero. This wasn't just any master. Epaphroditus had himself escaped slavery to become one of the most powerful administrators in the empire. Think about that irony. A former slave who now owned slaves, serving an emperor who murdered his own mother. Nero, the emperor who burned Christians alive as torches for his garden parties, who kicked his pregnant wife to death, who played his lyre while Rome burned. This was the world Epictetus inhabited, where human life was cheaper than wine, and a slave's suffering was mere entertainment. In Roman society, slaves weren't considered human beings. They were living tools, as Aristotle had called them. They could be beaten, raped, killed, or tortured at their master's whim. No law protected them. No God seemed to hear their prayers. For a young, intelligent boy who had known freedom, this reality must have been crushing. Epictetus watched free men debate philosophy in the forum while he fetched their scrolls. He saw senators speak of virtue while they violated their slaves. But even in slavery, Epictetus had one extraordinary opportunity. He was allowed to study with Musonius Rufus, one of Rome's greatest Stoic philosophers. In those stolen moments between servitude, in the shadows of marble columns, a revolution was brewing in a slave's mind. The moment that would define Epictetus, and ultimately Stoic philosophy itself, came not through triumph, but through suffering. According to one oft-told anecdote, when Epictetus was still a slave, his master Epaphroditus lost his temper and grabbed the young philosopher by the leg. He began twisting it, applying more and more pressure. Picture this scene: a powerful man, drunk on his authority, venting his rage on someone utterly helpless. A scene played out countless times across the Roman Empire with countless forgotten victims. But Epictetus was different. As Epaphroditus twisted his leg, Epictetus remained perfectly calm and said, "You will break my leg." The master, perhaps encouraged by the slave's composure, continued twisting. The bone snapped with a sickening crack. What happened next would echo through history. Epictetus did not scream, he did not beg, he did not curse. Instead, he looked at his master with complete tranquility and said, "Did I not tell you that it would break?" In that moment, something extraordinary occurred. The master had destroyed the slave's leg, but he had revealed something indestructible within the slave's soul: breath. Epictetus had discovered what would become the cornerstone of his philosophy: the recognition that there are things within our control and things beyond our control. His master could break his body, could chain his movements, could even kill him, but he could never control Epictetus's mind, his choices, his inner freedom. This wasn't resignation, it was revolution, the most radical revolution possible, the revolution of consciousness itself. From that day forward, Epictetus walked with a limp, a physical reminder of his hardship. But spiritually, he had never been more free. He had learned the secret that would make him invincible. External circumstances could harm his body, but they were powerless against his character, his judgment, his will to choose his response to suffering. The Roman elite measured freedom by the size of their estates, the number of their slaves, their proximity to power. But this broken slave had discovered a freedom they couldn't comprehend. Freedom from the tyranny of external circumstances. Freedom from the fear of loss. As he limped through those marble halls, carrying his master's correspondence, Epictetus was internally freer than any senator, any general, any emperor in Rome. Eventually, Epictetus was freed from slavery, whether through Epaphroditus' death or an act of manumission, we don't know. But freedom papers meant little to a man who had already liberated himself. With his physical freedom, Epictetus could finally live according to his true calling. He established a philosophy school in Nicopolis, a Greek city on the Adriatic coast, far from the corruption and cruelty of Rome. Here, the former slave would become one of history's most influential teachers. But this wasn't just any philosophy school. This was a radical experiment, a place where the wisdom forged in slavery would be offered freely to future leaders of the world. Students came from across the Roman Empire, not just Romans, but Greeks, Gauls, Syrians, Africans. Sons of senators sat beside former slaves. Romans who had enslaved nations were discovering liberty from their former slave. His core teaching could be summarized in one sentence that would open his most famous work, the Enchiridion. Some things are in our control and others are not. The latter should be nothing to you. Think about the audacity of this statement. Here was a man telling Roman citizens, people who believed they controlled the world, that most of what they obsessed over was beyond their control. Their wealth, their status, their reputation, even their bodies and their lives, all external, all ultimately outside their true power. But their judgments, their values, their responses to events, their character, these were theirs alone. No tyrant could touch them. No fortune could steal them. No disaster could destroy them. Students left Nicopolis transformed. They had arrived seeking success. They departed understanding significance. They had come wanting to control others. They left knowing how to control themselves. The slave had become the teacher of the world.
But why does Epictetus matter today? Why should his ancient wisdom concern us in an age of smartphones and social media, of global markets and space travel? Because human nature hasn't changed. The same anxieties that plagued Romans plague us still, just with different labels. Consider your last week. How much mental energy did you spend worrying about things completely outside your control? The stock market's volatility, your boss's mood, whether your social media post gets enough likes, the political chaos on the news, whether it will rain on your vacation. We're living exactly like those pre-Stoic Romans, consumed by externals, enslaved by circumstances, letting outside events dictate our inner peace. Epictetus would look at our modern anxiety epidemic and see the same fundamental error he witnessed in ancient Rome. We've confused what we can control with what we cannot. The dichotomy of control isn't just philosophical theory, it's practical psychology. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, which has helped millions overcome anxiety and depression, is built on principles Epictetus taught 2,000 years ago. The recognition that we cannot control events, but we can control our interpretation of events. Your job security? Not entirely under your control. Your work ethic and professional development? Completely under your control. Your children's choices? Beyond your control. Your example as a parent and the love you show them? Within your control. The pandemic taught us this lesson brutally. Millions lost their jobs, their businesses, their plans. Those who suffered least weren't necessarily those with the most money. They were those who could quickly distinguish between what they could and couldn't control, then focus entirely on the former. But here's where Epictetus goes deeper than modern self-help. He doesn't promise that focusing on what you can control will give you external success. He promises something better: internal freedom. Freedom from the exhausting cycle of hoping for things beyond your power, then suffering when they don't materialize. Social media anxiety? Epictetus would say, you cannot control how others perceive your posts, but you can control whether you post authentically or for validation. Career insecurity? You cannot control the economy, but you can control your skills, your integrity, your effort, and your adaptability. Relationship problems? You cannot control another person's feelings or choices, but you can control your own kindness, honesty, and commitment to growth. The slave who couldn't control when he'd be beaten had mastered the art of controlling his response to being beaten. That's a freedom most of us, despite our material prosperity, have never experienced. But here's the twist that makes Epictetus's story truly extraordinary. 60 years after a slave was tortured for his master's entertainment, the most powerful man on earth was studying that slave's words by candlelight. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, ruler of the known world, commander of the world's greatest army, filled his private journals with reflections on Epictetus's teachings. The Meditations, one of history's greatest works of philosophy, is saturated with the wisdom of the former slave. Think about that reversal of fortune. The slave's master is forgotten to history, but the slave's teachings guided Caesar himself. The man who couldn't even own himself became the teacher of the man who owned the world. Marcus Aurelius would write, "External things are not the problem, it's your assessment of them, which you can erase right now." Pure Epictetus. The emperor had learned from the slave that true power isn't the ability to control others, it's the ability to control yourself. This is perhaps the greatest vindication in human history, the ultimate proof that wisdom matters more than wealth, that character trumps circumstance, that the life of the mind can transcend any chain. The emperors are dust, but the slave's philosophy endures. Epictetus died around 135 AD, but his death was merely physical. His ideas had achieved true immortality. From Roman generals to Christian monks, from Renaissance scholars to modern psychologists, his insights have guided humanity through its darkest hours and greatest triumphs. The slave who learned freedom in chains had taught the world this revolutionary truth. Liberty isn't something given to you by others or taken away by circumstances. It's something you choose, moment by moment, through your responses to whatever life presents. External freedom is a gift. Internal freedom is a choice. You might not be able to control your circumstances today, but you can control your character. You might not be able to change your situation immediately, but you can change your perspective instantly. You might not be able to determine what happens to you, but you can determine who you become through what happens to you. That's the wisdom of Epictetus, the slave who was freer than his masters, the teacher who learned his greatest lessons in his darkest moments, the man who proved that no power on earth can enslave a mind that refuses to be enslaved. But Epictetus wasn't the only Stoic who faced tyranny with wisdom. His fellow philosopher Seneca would also serve under a mad emperor, but his story would end not in triumph, but in tragedy. When Nero's paranoia finally turned on his former tutor, even the wisest man in Rome couldn't escape the ultimate test of his philosophy. But that's a story for another time.